All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into how the words we use, like literally every day, can actually shape how we see gender.
Fascinating stuff, right?
It is. We're talking about feminist post-structuralist discourse analysis.
FPDA,
It's
right?
FPDA for short. Now, I know that sounds intimidating, but trust me, it's super interesting, and you've sent over some really cool articles from the Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit website.
Yeah, they're great examples.
So by the end of this deep dive, you'll not only get what FPDA is all about, but you'll also be able to spot those sneaky ways language can either reinforce old ideas about gender or flip the script entirely.
It's like a code, kind of hidden in plain sight.
Okay, I'm hooked already, but let's be real. Even the name FPDA sounds like something you need a PhD to understand.
Fair enough.
So can we break it down a bit? Like, what are we actually dealing with?
Think of it this way. FPDA basically mixes feminist theory, which is all about understanding and challenging inequality between genders, with post-structuralism,
Right.
which is a way of looking at language and how it creates meaning, how it shapes our understanding of the world.
Gotcha. So we're not just talking about words on their own. We're talking about how those words build up entire systems of thought about what it means to be male or female.
Exactly. It's about looking at the big picture, how language creates these categories and how those categories impact our lives.
And one of the core principles, right, of FPDA is that gender isn't something we're born with,
Right. It's not like eye color or something.
but it's something we perform and understand through the lens of our culture and the language we use.
It's social construct.
Oh, okay, wait, hold on. Constructed nature of gender. Does that mean there's no such thing as male or female?
I see where you're going with that. It's a common question and a really important one.
Because I'm a bit lost, honestly.
It's not about denying biological differences.
Okay.
What FPDA is saying is that those differences don't automatically determine how we should act or the roles we should have in society.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it.
Think about it like this. We're not born knowing how to act like a man or act like a woman. Those are things we learn
Through
the messages we get from our families, from the media, from the way people talk to us. All of those messages create this fabric of what we call gender.
So it's kind of like we're all actors in a play, and society has given us the script.
That's a great analogy. It brings us to Judith Butler's concept of gender performativity, which is super important to FPDA. Butler argues that gender isn't something we are, it's something we do.
A performance.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm seeing how this all connects. So we're performing gender based on these scripts we've been given. But how does that actually play out in real life? Like in those articles from the Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit website.
Those articles use FPDA to show how these performances are happening everywhere, even in places we might not think about. For example, how are female politicians talked about compared to male politicians? What kind of language is used? What images are we shown?
And how those messages tell us what men and women should be like. You know what, now that you mention it, just the other day I saw an ad for some cleaning product. And of course it was a woman doing the cleaning.
Classic, right?
It seems so obvious now.
That's exactly what FPDA helps us see. Those things that seem normal, it actually reinforce very specific ideas about gender.
Even in literature, like whether it's a classic novel or something more modern, FPDA can help us understand why female characters act the way they do.
Right. Are they confined to certain roles, or are they breaking free from those expectations?
Wow, this is blowing my mind. So we've established that language is huge GE when it comes to gender, but where did these ideas come from? Who are the masterminds behind FPDA?
Like any field, FPDA has been shaped by a ton of brilliant thinkers, but three names really stand out.
Who are they?
Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, and Jacques Lacan.
Okay, hit me with some knowledge. Tell us about these FPDA giants.
All right, so let's start with Derrida. His big idea was deconstruction, which sounds super complex, but it's basically about looking for those hidden contradictions in texts.
Contradictions, like what?
Well, think about it. Words can have different meanings depending on who's using them and in what context. Derrida helps us see that these categories we take for granted, like male and female, are way more fluid than we might think.
So it's like he's asking us to question the assumptions that are baked into our language.
Exactly. He's saying that language isn't just this neutral tool, it can be used to maintain power structures, including those based on gender.
Okay, makes sense. So what about Foucault? Where does he fit in?
Foucault was all about power, how it works, how it's used, and how it shapes our view of the world. His concept of power knowledge is key for FPDA.
Power knowledge.
Yeah, he argued that power isn't just someone at the top giving orders. It flows through society in much more subtle ways.
Right.
Well, one way is through discourse, the way we talk and write about things. Foucault helps us see that even things we consider truth about gender are actually shaped by power dynamics.
It's making me think about all those common sense ideas we have about gender, like how people say men are naturally better at math.
Or that women are more emotional.
Exactly, those assumptions.
Foucault would say those ideas aren't natural at all. They're created and maintained by power structures that benefit from those beliefs.
Oh.
And FPDA gives us the tools to analyze those power dynamics and how they work through language.
This has blown my mind.
Oh.
Okay, we've got Derrida, we've got Foucault, now bring on Lacan. What did he bring to the table?
Okay, so Lacan is where things get a bit more complex, but also super insightful.
Hit me.
He was a psychoanalyst, so he was interested in how our sense of self develops. His idea of the symbolic order is really important to FPDA.
Okay, lay it on me. What's the symbolic order?
It's basically this giant web of language, symbols, and cultural meanings that we're born into. It's how we make sense of the world and ourselves.
Makes sense.
But Lacan argued that this symbolic order is already loaded with societal norms, many of which are patriarchal, meaning they favor men over women.
So from the moment we learn to talk, we're already being shaped by these gendered ideas that are built into language itself.
That's it. And FPDA helps us understand how those super deep-seated, often unconscious structures of language affect how we see ourselves and others in terms of gender. It helps us see how those structures can contribute to inequality.
Wow, this is heavy stuff. Do you think we could maybe use a real-world example or something to help illustrate all this, like make it click for our listener?
Sure. Imagine a world where everyone is assigned a color at birth based on their perceived gender, and everything in that world is categorized according to those colors.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You wouldn't even think to question those colors, right? It's just the way things are.
You just accept it.
That's kind of like how we grow up in a world already categorized by gender.
That's a really great way to put it. So FPDA is about helping us see those categories and understand how they were created and how they shape our lives.
It's about recognizing how language shapes our understanding of gender and using that knowledge to challenge limitations and create more inclusive ways of being.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork, we've met the FPDA all-stars.
The dream team.
But how does this actually play out in the real world? Give us some real-world examples of FPDA in action, especially from those Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit articles you mentioned.
Those articles get some great examples. Let's start with how FPDA can be used to analyze media representation. Researchers use it to understand how women are portrayed in the news, in advertising, in popular culture.
They're looking at the language, the images, the whole package.
Exactly. Welcome back to our deep dive into feminist, post-structuralist discourse analysis.
You know, as we were wrapping up part one, I kept thinking about those articles from the Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit website.
Oh, yeah.
It feels like they could be our own little FPDA laboratory, you know?
They really are a fantastic resource for seeing FPDA in action. They give these practical examples of how it can be applied to media, literature, even everyday conversations.
Exactly. And it's like those articles themselves are examples of discourse, right?
Yeah.
Which means we could actually use FPDA to analyze them too.
Yeah, that's such a good point. We're not just looking at what the articles say, but how they say it, the language, the structure, all of it.
It's like FPDA is this lens we can use to examine anything.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's put on our FPDA glasses, right, and get back to those real-world examples. You mentioned media analysis. I'm super curious to see how FPDA can unpack those subtle biases in media representation.
One area that's been studied a ton using FPDA is the portrayal of women in politics. Researchers look at how female politicians are represented in the news, political debates, campaign materials.
I'm guessing you're finding that women are often judged differently than men, even when they're saying or doing the same things?
You're spot on. One of the things FPDA helps us see is how language creates and reinforces these double standards. For example, female politicians are often scrutinized more for their appearance, their family lives,
While men are judged on.
their policies, their leadership skills. It's like there's this unspoken rule book that says it's okay to comment on a woman's outfit or her children, but those things are off limits for men.
Yeah, it's totally a double standard.
And that's what FPDA helps us uncover, those unspoken rules hidden in our language. These rules often work against women by making people focus on things that aren't really relevant to their ability to lead.
Can you give us Like specific examples of the kind of language that does this.
Sure. Think about the words often used to describe female politicians. They're more likely to be called emotional or aggressive.
Even when they're just being assertive.
Exactly. And those words have these negative connotations for women, especially in politics, whereas a man who's assertive might be praised for being a strong leader.
A woman doing the same thing might be labeled as bossy.
Difficult, yeah.
Like the exact same behavior is interpreted totally differently based on gender.
Exactly. And FPDA helps us see how language is used to frame those interpretations and create different expectations for men and women.
This reminds me of that idea we talked about, how gender is performative.
Yeah.
It's not just who we are, but how we're perceived and how those perceptions are shaped by language.
That's such a great connection, and it highlights why it's so important to pay attention to language. It's not just reflecting reality, it's creating it.
Whoa.
Right.
Okay. So we've talked about how women are portrayed in politics. Where else can FPDA shed light on media representation?
Advertising is a big one. FPDA researchers analyze how gender is represented in ads for everything: cars, cleaning products, toys.
I bet they're finding a lot of those classic gender stereotypes.
You're right. Ads for cars, for example, often show men as the drivers, the ones in control,
And women are?
relegated to the passenger seat.
Or they show women struggling with chores while a man comes in and saves the day.
With some new gadget, right? It's like those ads are creating this fantasy world where men are always competent and women always need help.
And even though we might recognize them as fantasies, those images can still impact our beliefs.
Our behaviors, too.
Yeah, they reinforce these ideas that certain products are for men or for women.
Which limits opportunities for everyone.
It's crazy to think about how much power those ads have
Right. Even though they seem harmless.
in shaping how we see what's normal for men and women.
It's all about that insidious nature of discourse. These messages just creep into our subconscious and shape our perceptions without us even realizing it.
So FPDA is like a tool to shine a light on those messages and help us see them for what they are.
It's like giving us X-ray vision.
To see those underlying structures of gender in media.
I love that.
Okay, we've talked about media. How about literature? I'm curious how this approach works with something as creative as fiction.
Literature is amazing for FPDA analysis. Researchers might look at how female characters are portrayed, the language used to describe them, their roles, their relationships.
I bet it's especially interesting with classic literature, where those gender roles were often more rigid.
Absolutely. Imagine an FPDA analysis of a Jane Austen novel, for example. It might focus on how the language reflects the social constraints on women in 19th century England,
Like how marriage was seen as the ultimate goal.
or how a woman's worth was based on her beauty and her ability to find a husband.
So it's not just about the story itself, but about how the language reinforces certain ideas.
Exactly. By analyzing the language, we gain a deeper understanding of the social and cultural context.
But this isn't just for old books, right? We can use it with contemporary stuff, too.
Of course. A lot of contemporary authors are intentionally playing with gender norms.
Challenging those traditional representations.
And FTDA can help us see exactly how they're doing that through their language choices and the stories they tell.
Like how a novel explores transgender experiences.
Or challenges that binary of male and female.
It sounds like FPDA can be such a powerful tool for understanding how literature shapes our understanding of gender.
It's a two-way street, really. Literature can both reinforce existing norms, AD offer new possibilities.
For how we think about gender and identity.
And FPDA helps us analyze that dynamic interplay.
Okay, so we've seen how FPDA can be used to analyze media and literature.
Two big ones.
But what about just everyday language? I'm still trying to wrap my head around how this theoretical framework applies to something as casual as, like, a conversation with a friend.
It might seem surprising, but FPDA is super relevant to those everyday interactions. Researchers are finding that even casual conversations are filled with subtle cues and messages about gender,
Those messages can.
reinforce or challenge stereotypes, often without us realizing it.
So it's like those seemingly harmless comments or jokes that can actually have a huge impact on how we see gender.
That's it. And FPDA helps us see those things not as isolated incidents, but as part of a bigger pattern.
Of how we talk about men and women.
For example, research shows that women are more likely to be interrupted.
Especially by men.
Yeah, and those interruptions can be a subtle way of asserting dominance.
Or dismissing what a woman has to say.
Exactly. It's like saying, what you have to say isn't as important as what I have to say.
Wow, I never thought of it like that.
But those messages, over time, they really impact how women see themselves and how they're treated.
Okay, you've made me super aware of my own conversations now.
Good. The more aware we become of these patterns, the more we can start to change them. We can choose to interrupt less, listen more actively.
And speak up when we see those gender dynamics happening.
Right.
This is actually pretty empowering, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like FPDA gives us this whole new set of tools, not just for understanding gender, but for creating better relationships.
More equitable, more respectful relationships.
Exactly. And that's what FPDA is all about, right?
Using our understanding of language and discourse to create positive change in the world.
But it's important to remember, FPDA isn't some magic solution.
It has its own limitations, its own complexities.
Right, like those critiques we touched on earlier.
About essentialism versus constructionism.
And the concern that it makes individuals seem powerless against these larger social forces.
Those are important to consider.
It's definitely not simple.
It's important to acknowledge those critiques and engage with them thoughtfully. FPDA is an ongoing conversation, you know?
Always evolving.
Exactly. It's about constantly refining our understanding of how language shapes our world. And those critiques help us make that understanding more nuanced and more robust.
So it's not just about finding answers, it's about asking better questions.
Yes. It's about challenging assumptions, digging deeper, being open to new ways of seeing the world.
And realizing that we're all part of this conversation.
Our voices and our choices matter.
We all have a role to play in shaping the future of gender and creating a more just world for everyone.
Well said. And I think that's a perfect place to pause for now. We've covered so much ground.
But there's still more to explore.
Always more.
All right, deep divers. That wraps up part 2 of our exploration into feminist post-structuralist discourse analysis. We've gone deep into real-world examples, explored how this approach helps us understand everything from media to everyday conversations.
It's been quite a ride.
Join us for part 3, where we'll look at the future of FPDA and what it all means for you. Welcome back, deep divers. We're in the final stretch of our exploration into feminist post-structuralist discourse analysis.
It has been quite the journey.
It has. We've unpacked the basics of FPDA.
Seeing how it works in the real world.
Yeah, and I'm still processing everything we talked about in part 2.
Lots to unpack.
It's like FPDA has given me this, superpower.
A superpower.
Yeah, the ability to decode these hidden messages about gender that are all around us.
I see what you mean. It's about that critical awareness, right, of how language shapes our perceptions.
Exactly. So let's keep that momentum going. We touched on some of the new frontiers of FPDA research.
Like intersectionality.
Global and transnational perspective, the impact of technology.
Oh, big one.
Really excited to dive deeper into those.
Let's do it.
So, intersectionality. This has been a total game changer for FPDA.
It's helped us move beyond that idea that all women have the same experience.
Just because they're women. Right.
Right, because that's obviously not true.
A woman's experience of gender is shaped by so many other things.
Her race, her class, her sexuality, her ability.
Her culture.
Yeah, so many things. Exactly, and FPDA researchers are really starting to integrate those intersections into their analyses.
So, for example, how beauty standards are different for women of color.
Compared to white women, yeah.
Or how expectations around motherhood are different for working class women.
Versus middle class women. Yeah.
And how those expectations are reflected in the language we use and the stories we tell.
Exactly. By bringing those different perspectives to light, FPDA helps us get this much richer understanding of gender.
That we're adding more colors to the palette, right? It's not just black and white.
Exactly.
We can see this full spectrum of experiences.
I love that analogy.
So it's recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to understanding gender, right? And that's where those global and transnational perspectives come in.
Absolutely, because for too long, FPDA research was very focused on Western cultures.
Which limits our understanding.
Big time.
It's like trying to understand the entire universe by studying one planet.
Exactly.
So we have to expand our perspective.
To include different cultures and contexts.
To make FPDA more inclusive and insightful.
Researchers are now looking at how gender is constructed and contested in cultures all around the world.
So, for example, how women are represented in media in India.
Or the complexities of gender identity within indigenous communities.
Yeah, exactly. And by studying these different perspectives,
FPDA can offer a more comprehensive view of gender.
One that recognizes how fluid and dynamic it is.
How it's expressed and experienced all around the world,
It's like we're adding new chapters to the book of gender, right? Each one telling a different story.
each one offering new insights.
And those stories are crucial for challenging the assumptions and biases that we often bring to this whole conversation about gender.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so we've talked about intersectionality, global perspectives.
Big ones.
Now let's talk about technology.
The elephant in the room.
Right. It feels like digital media is changing everything about how we experience gender.
From how we communicate to how we present ourselves online.
It's a brave new world out there.
And FPDA is just starting to catch up.
Right. Trying to grapple with all the implications for our understanding of gender.
Because think about it. Social media, online gaming, virtual reality, AI.
It's endless.
These are all new spaces where gender is being performed in ways we've never seen before.
And FPDA offers this critical lens to examine those new spaces.
So, for example, how are women and girls represented in online gaming?
Are those representations reinforcing stereotypes or challenging them in new ways?
Or, even bigger, how are algorithms shaping our perceptions of gender and sexuality?
Often without us even knowing it's happening.
Right. It's like these invisible forces are influencing our understanding of what it means to be male or female.
That's a really important point because we often think of technology as neutral.
But it's not?
Not at all. It's designed by people who have their own biases about gender.
And those biases can be embedded in the code itself.
Exactly. FPDA helps us see those biases, unpack them, and challenge them. It's about making sure digital technology is used to create more equitable and inclusive spaces.
Not making things worse, yeah. So FPDA isn't just about analyzing discourse, it's about shaping it, using our understanding of language to create the world we want to live in.
Both online and offline.
That's the goal.
Okay, we've explored some exciting new areas of FPDA research, but I want to bring it back to our listener.
Always got to bring it back to the listener.
Why should you care about all this?
Great question. I think FPDA is relevant to everyone, not just academics. It helps us understand how we each play a part in constructing gender, whether we realize it or not.
Give us the top 3 reasons why our listeners should care about FPDA.
Okay, first, FPDA makes us more critical consumers of information. Once you see how gender is constructed through language, you start to notice those subtle biases everywhere.
In the news, advertising, movies, everything.
But you can't unsee it.
It's like developing a sixth sense.
For detecting those messages. And that awareness is so important for making informed choices and resisting those harmful stereotypes.
Okay, so reason number 1, be a smarter consumer of media. What's number 2?
FPDA encourages us to think about our own language choices. We all use language, and our words have power.
Whether we mean them to or not.
Right. We can either contribute to the problem or be part of the solution.
So think about the jokes we tell, the compliments we give, the way we talk to people.
Even the small things can impact how others perceive gender.
Once we understand how language shapes gender, we can start using it more consciously.
To create a more respectful and equitable world.
Love that. Language as a tool for social change. Okay, we've got critical media consumption, mindful language use.
What's number 3?
Hit us with that final reason.
The third reason is that FPDA offers hope. It shows us that gender isn't this fixed, predetermined thing.
We're not stuck with those categories society gives us.
Right. It's constantly being created and recreated through how we interact and the language we use.
So we can challenge those categories and create new possibilities.
That's what's so powerful about FPDA. It reminds us that we're not just passive recipients of these societal messages.
We're active participants.
We have the power to shape the meaning of gender. And we can use that power to create a better world for everyone.
So well said. To our listener out there, wherever you are, FPDA is for you.
It's for everyone.
It's a framework for understanding the world, for understanding yourself.
For creating a future where gender isn't a barrier, but a source of possibility.
It all starts with paying attention to language.
The words we use, the stories we tell, the way we communicate.
Language is powerful, and with FPDA as our guide,
we can learn to use it wisely.
Well, deep divers, we've reached the summit of our FPDA mountain.
It's been an amazing climb.
We've seen some breathtaking views.
And faced some thought-provoking challenges.
Along the way, we've discovered that FPDA is more than just a theory.
It's a way of seeing the world.
It's a way of engaging with language.
And it's a way of creating positive change.
Let's take these insights back down to our everyday lives.
Be more critical of the media.
Be more mindful of our language.
And be more hopeful about the future.
With FPDA as our compass, we can navigate the complexities of gender and create a world where everyone can thrive.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep using your voice.
We'll see you next time.
Happy diving!